Good question. I feel like it's always been that way. I think maybe like 12 years old, 13. I can remember particularly being in school and like the films I was obsessed with when I was like 14 were like Fargo and Taxi Driver and LA Confidential. And I would print out the posters of them in like really, really small version and like stick them on my desk. It was just sort of, it was my whole identity from a really early age. So it just always felt like there was that singular trajectory from a very young age of this was a world that I got. This was a language I was starting to figure out from a really young age. I enjoyed finding new films and I enjoyed finding going through, I think there was IMDb's top 100 back then. But like other shows and other like Channel 4's top 100 films of all time, you would just find yourself going through that list and wanting to watch as many as you could. And at a far too young age, like there was no reason I should have watched Taxi Driver at the age of 13, but I did and I loved it and I still love it to this day. But yeah, I think it was always there and wanting to make my own films. Like I wrote three feature screenplays by the age of 16. Nobody will ever read those. They're absolutely terrible. Um, but they definitely showed my obsession and the things that I was interested in and the themes that I was sort of obsessed with as a teen. You could probably psychoanalyze them and kind of say, all right, there's stuff going on with her life. She's trying to figure out her identity through film. And that just kind of kept going. And I feel like film and my identity are just intrinsically linked because of that. Like I feel musicians are the same. It's just sort of, it's a part of who you are and you just can't get that out of your DNA. But yeah, at least from the age of 12, if not earlier. Oh, I mean, there was definitely an engine there that I had that was like, this is the only thing I'm going to do in my life. But thankfully, my parents didn't think I was going nuts. Which, they probably, in fairness, could have thought maybe she's taking this a bit, too seriously. Maybe she shouldn't be watching Taxi Driver. But my parents were, professionally, they were teachers and lecturers, but both of them were very creative in their own way. That, my mom, my mom really loved to play concert piano. So we learned how to play piano from an early age. My sister played the cello, I played the oboe. I wanted to sing. I also did violin and cello for a bit. And my dad played flamenco guitar, painted. He studied philosophy, which I think has a huge influence on how I kind of view the world and view stories and, why people are telling stories and what they don't realize in the way that they tell stories. So that was the environment I grew up in, was always questioning things, and it was an incredibly creative environment, and that kind of nurtured my love for film as a medium to express myself. And it was just always sort of, you know, a thing that like I will be, I will try to get into film school. And that was always the one thing I wanted to do. And they didn't step in and say, do you want to maybe think about engineering or something a bit more practical? Um, so I'm really thankful that I grew up in that environment where they were like, yeah, you're going to do film. Okay, what do you need? And that was definitely a really good environment to grow up into, especially when you look back at it, you're like, she took that, she took that really far. And, there was no safety net in a way. It was like, yeah, that's what you're going to do, and we're going to find a way to help you do it.
Yeah, it feels like
That's a good question because it keeps changing. And I think, part of a journey as a writer not just a filmmaker, but a writer is trying to figure out what their point of view on the world is. And that takes a really long time and a lot of work to figure out, because you can only really figure it out having done it so many times and kind of pared down what you have to contribute as a writer. I feel like at this point in my career, having done a few shorts and I've been developing a few features for the last few years, my my kind of point of view in the world feels ironed out to the point where I know I can say it's going to be genre or genre adjacent. It's going to be um, usually revolving around uh, women's relationship with uh, a world around them that is defined by the threat of male violence.
Right.
And generally about our rage and about our
Mm, mm,
um, the things that we keep repressed inside living in this world. I think those are themes that I keep coming back to one after another, whether it's a folk horror or a body horror or a tech horror. It's about what living in a world where everything we do, like, whether we go on holiday, whether we go um, whether we go out, whether we just go to the shop, we have to check ourselves and kind of see, are we signaling ourselves to invite danger upon us? Are we going to come home too late? Are we going to walk down the right road? And that fear, that constant fear, whether it's there or not, is something that kind of drives me mad, because I just, it doesn't make sense that we've come this far as a civilization and yet those fears remain, and we have to constantly be worried about whether male violence is going to intrude in our lives. And I feel like that's the general thesis I like to explore in my work, at least in the features I've been writing, is what that does to us intrinsically, whether it's good, bad, or positive, and try to find some empowerment angle on it, even if we don't look, even if my characters don't do the best things. I just find those are the kind of things I like to kind of focus on, is our repressed rage at having to just be okay at living in a world where, you know, people get beat up on the street randomly and that's okay. It's not okay. And I kind of, those are the things I'm trying to work out through my work, I think.
yeah, great answer. So much of that needing to work out what your own personal view on the world is, even when sometimes have you found as you've journeyed through it, because obviously you're in the industry, enough time to have seen a progression in yourself as a person, not just as an artist. Um, do you think that your work obviously has dramatically changed since you started sitting down and writing it at 16 or 15? And now, how do you think you stay compelled with your own ideas and stay on track when you're kind of deep in maybe an edit mode, or you're kind of just plunging your feet into the pool of a project and you're going, I actually don't know how I feel about this issue yet. And do you find that kind of puts brakes on the thing, that if it's not really, not that it has to be thought out completely and fleshed out, but almost like your own POV on it has to exist in a deep way in your body so that you can just let go and let the thing emerge?
Yeah, like I think it 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 took a long time to really trust my gut. And I think that's the big thing that, not a lot of people kind of tell people who are just starting out in film and storytellers, is to trust their own gut, but also kind of to try and interrogate their own gut as to why they need to have it a certain way. I think it kind of goes both ways, but one of the problems I've seen happen a lot is, people are coming in and trying to tell their stories and they're kind of questioning what they're trying to say. They're trying to figure out if this is the best way, and they're looking to other people to verify it for them and to affirm it for them or to question it. And, if you're going to, you're going to get a lot of notes from a lot of people as to what you should do, but only you know what you should write, and only you know what should be in this script. You can get as many practical help, as much practical help as you can from script editors, and definitely there'll be a lot of merit to listening to notes and kind of making sure your scripts are good. But one of the things I wish I knew earlier was that kind of thread of madness through everything, even from scripts that I wrote when I was 16 to short films that you're pretty sure are a bit of a leap of faith to see if they might even work narratively, to the features I'm writing now. The thread that's consistent in all of them is a little bit of a bucket attitude and kind of see, this might be a disaster, but I need to take a chance because there's something I want to listen to and I want to nurture and I want to see if that's going to come to life, because that's your voice in so many ways. And a lot of people are going to kind of give you notes to tell you what you should do, and that might diminish that voice and that kind of thread through everything. And I feel like that's something that just gets stronger the more opportunities you get to make and to write, is trusting your gut and knowing when to question it, and kind of having that leap of faith that you might not have a project perfectly worked out, but the exploration of development and the exploration of writing something is part of that journey to find out that out as well.
Yeah, so brilliant. Like staying curious inside the very, very unknown parts of creating something. And
Vulnerable parts of creating something where everyone's going to be like, this is
yeah.
terrible, this is wrong, you should be doing this and this. And like, how do you shut off all of that noise?
Yes, to get to your own vein of gold, I guess, and not getting, you know, overcome with other people's suggestions, especially when I guess at a certain point they're the people who are maybe providing the money for these projects and they're the ones who are signing the checks and feeling a need. How do you kind of balance? What do you use in your day to day? Because I'd imagine it is kind of a day to day muscle, like you talk about working that instinct muscle as often as you can, and it works best and proves itself best, I think, like intuition does, when you get to use it and see, ah, my God, it was actually true that time it was telling me that. How do you kind of keep your gut muscle toned? And the lovely thing you've said about like making sure that you're not just accepting what your gut says, you're also having a healthy devil's advocate for what your gut says, because a lot of the time your gut just wants to keep you safe. It just wants to keep you in the your own comfort zone creatively. What do you use kind of as technique or as, hobby or even interpersonal relationship to keep that relationship happening?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's so funny you're saying like you're toning your instinctive gut. I was like, what's the definition of like inspirational gut sit-ups? Like what are the core
Absolutely.
workouts
Can we
for
trademark?
your yeah, exactly. This whole new workout for your brain. I think like one of the things I keep kind of coming back to is just watching more movies and kind of, like at the end of the day, filmmaking is a relationship with the end of the day. Sorry, I sound so like, assured. You know, I feel like the director's relationship, their core relationship is with an audience. And you can only really nurture that further, if anything. Like you've got stories and ideas that you want to say, that you want to share, but you're trying to communicate something to a mass of people that might be specific mass of people or a specific demographic, or like I've been lucky enough to go to different festivals. Each festival audience feels so different from one another, but when you're sitting there in an audience on an opening night for a movie and you're hearing how people are reacting, that should always be in the forefront of your mind when you're making something, is trying to envision what your audience is. And it might not be what someone else wants your audience to be, but um, listening to your gut as an audience member, I think is maybe even more where I'm coming from with the gut inspiration. It's like, what works because you've sat in those audiences, you've watched those films, and you've responded on an emotional level to certain things, or a technique or a shot or a plot point. There's things that that didn't work because things took too long, or I didn't like that characterization of the main character or whatever. But you just kind of become more aware of those things and become more attuned to those things the more films you watch, and specifically the more movies you watch in an audience with a crowd of other people. Because I think that that matters a lot, is listening to what you want as a audience member and letting that determine what comes to life on the page. And when you feel like you might need a bit of a shift in something, or a really impressive beat here or something, I think listening to those instincts is really important. So the
Mm.
workout is definitely watch more and more movies and see what people are making, see what new movies people are making. Always be curious about new ideas that people are trying to do, and why did they do it that way, not this way. I think that's a really good way to kind of keep that gut tight.
I know a lot of people have different opinions about him. He's certainly not everybody's favorite playwright, but David Mamet does say something at one point in his masterclass where he's like, people are idiots, but as an audience, they're just one big amoeba of genius. And it's because collectively they join all of their brains together and understand, embodied from generations of us watching stories, how the story is going to unfold. And we can kind of intrinsically know when a story should have shifted just 3 minutes prior, when a scene should have ended like 60 seconds ago. Like we know the ripples and the rhythms of what storytelling not necessarily should work like. Not that there's like a metric of
Yeah.
the only way is this way kind of a thing, but we know how to be satisfied, and it's kind of our innate right and need as an audience to be satisfied, not necessarily placated to or always given what we want. We need to be subverted, we need to be kind of moved around and challenged, but you do need to. And I think you've made a great point about what your audience, keeping them at the forefront of your mind for who you're talking to and who you're communicating to, but not necessarily just giving them what they want. Like not making art so that you can keep your audience happy, like doing it a way that will make them happy. But yes, keeping them at the forefront of their mind for how you're communicating that to make it the best communication of that story possible, given that it's not going to be just shown to a wall. It's not going to be shown to, a rake of Barbie dolls. It's going to be shown to conscious beings who will take it in collectively. You know what I mean?
That's
Um,
it, exactly. It's like and I think it's sort of it's also the difference of like that David Mamet quote was so interesting, because yeah, like on our own, I think we can kind of, especially with social media and letterbox, we tend to kind of like overanalyze and be too in our brain when we are watching something. Like find it's impossible not to be watching a film and thinking like, oh, this is probably going to score a 3 star on my letterbox later on. You're sort of you're hyper aware of the sort of like the mechanisms of how you're going to a cinema and consuming work. Whereas like, the I think that David Mamet quote was interesting, because you sort of, as a collective of people, you you are in mob mentality, and reason and kind of, you know, um and the intellect, I guess, kind of like melts away a bit, because you are just feeling your way through a film. You're trying to emotionally grab at certain things, and you're letting go of that kind of over analytical kind of part of your brain, hopefully. And I find that hard to do. Obviously, working in film, you're just constantly analyzing everything, but you want those experiences of just letting somebody guide you through a rake of different feelings. And when I think about horror particularly, the movies that really work for me, and yet they don't work for my partner in the same level, are the ones that like deeply upset and traumatize me. That at the end of them, I just feel like I am a wreck, but I love this. This
yeah,
is,
yeah, total
and
role.
that's kind of like, what emotion do you want to evoke in your audience? Like, oh, I want to emotionally wreck them, traumatize them, and make them question everything that they've held dear in their life. Sure, but then you have a direction of what you're communicating with your audience with, and the audience of sickos that love that, like me, are going to respond to that, and some people will be like, no, no, and that's fine. And I think that's kind of where audiences are great like that, is they they'll morph and change and kind of react in the way that you're going to guide them. But if you're in control of those emotional responses, they're going to have an experience nonetheless. It's a very good question, because I think like I started college in 2005, which is a really long time ago.
Not long ago.
God, nearly 20 years.
Yeah, it is a strange.
Ooh, um, not, like in so many respects, not a lot has changed, but, technically a lot of what we studied, I think we learned how to, we learned how to, uh, to shoot on film, which has sort of, for the most part, become quite obsolete, and I think kind of technology has changed so much in 20 years in terms of how we shoot films that a lot of the kind of the key practical stuff has vastly changed. But that's the same with every medium, really. It's hard to know. Like I had a really very positive experience in college in IEDT and met and was in class with a great community of people that are still working today, and I'm still lucky enough to work with them. I think there's one thing I keep kind of coming back to is that there was, in my year, there were so few female students. There were three of us, I think, that graduated, maybe even only two,
Oh, wow.
um, in a class of like nearly 30 people. And I think a lot of that kind of energy was very male and film bro-y, and they're lovely guys. I love them so much. But of course, that energy really shifts the whole dynamic of a class where it's male dominant. And I think one of the things that I kind of that really stuck in my mind and I could never kind of address properly at the time was, you know, one grad movie I wanted to make was very like dark and, it's similar into the vein of stuff I continue to write about, but it was like a thriller, and it was dark, and it was urban, and it was obviously going to be a mess. But I was told by one of the lecturers that, like, a lot of the guys, they're doing a lot of kind of, drug dealy, urban, dark horror stories. Like, we'd love to see a bit of variety. And would you prefer to make something a bit softer that speaks to your personality? You're quite a soft woman. It would be nice to see that kind of the femininity come out a bit more in your films. And I think it was a well-intentioned um, note, but it was sort of like the guys get to make the dark stuff. Can you make a nice flowery movie? Was sort of the general
Oh,
vibe of it. And I think it was a great note to get because I took it and it didn't work. And that was great because then I could figure out this is where I need to be. But yeah, I think that was the only thing that kind of stuck out to me in regards to bigger things that are untrue. I think I don't know, not much. I mean, we, I think the landscape of film and how we tell film has changed. Screenplay structure is always the thing that kind of remains a constant that, you absolutely should learn and understand how the eight sequence approach works and the three act structure and Aristotle's poetics. And, we had some amazing and not so amazing lecturers in that field that taught us everything we need to know. But as I worked in development throughout the years, I would find it interesting when filmmakers would have their own take on what structure could be, and move away from it and do something that, again, listening to your own gut and what the audience might not be expecting, and subvert that a little bit. And I think that's definitely shifted over the years, is that audiences know the audiences are too smart to know, um, you know, to not know what's coming. And I think, we as storytellers need to be more innovative and change that expectation and subvert the standard approach to narrative, because I just think audiences are too smart. They're going to guess what's happening ahead of you. And I think you have to, again, listen to your gut as a audience member. What are you expecting to happen versus what you wouldn't expect to happen? And I think that kind of like move away from traditional storytelling um, is a good thing, even though it scares the hell out of a lot of producers, I imagine. I when I worked in development, I was really lucky to be in those circumstances of working with really confident, really interesting filmmakers who were assured at what their contribution was to a film. And I think I picked up so much from them, like people like Joe Lauder and Christine Malloy and Emer Reynolds. I think they, as directors and writers, they had such a confidence over what their perspective was, that you could tell when filmmakers were going to be in trouble because they didn't have that confidence and they didn't know how to articulate what they wanted from a film. And that leaves you vulnerable to everybody's amazing notes, because everybody has amazing notes. Everyone's got amazing ideas of what you could do with your film. Um, and I think only you are going to be able to have the confidence to be like, no, this is the trajectory of this film. This needs to be this and this and this. We can't do that standard thing here. And you would find yourself absolutely in circumstances where people are getting scared and there's a lot of money on the line and you want this to get funded, so you opt for the safe option of, you know, not making the main character so unlikable, or not like not shifting gears so completely in the second half. But I find when people did that confidently and they could communicate it and prove it in what they were writing, people were susceptible to it and could see the vision behind it. I find with younger writers, or not younger writers, sorry, because it's not necessarily an age thing. It's with newer writers and with newer um, talents who have in some ways been unproven. It's very hard to prove what you want to do with that, and I think that's a big barrier. Is people would argue that you might want to have the safe option for your earlier earlier work and make something quite kind of standard, whereas like in your gut that your contribution to a story needs to be a different shape.
Mm.
And that can be tricky because I think it can kind of read as, I don't know if you know what you're doing, but I've definitely, I think taking risks is important, and I think in the business of filmmaking and in development, and I'm absolutely guilty of this myself as a development exec, it's the you have the will to make it easy for everybody, and you want to kind of revert to decisions that you think are going to work, but because there isn't that kind of assurance there, that confidence behind it. But yeah, I find that whole kind of navigation around what we all want to achieve from a film. Are we all moving in the same direction? Just really fascinating, because everybody's so different, and especially producers, you want to get on side. You want your financiers to be happy with the quality of the work that you're doing. So you have to really put in the work to prove it. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's you know, you have a particular vision, um, and you could be working with people who don't have the wealth of knowledge of film that you do, that like your interesting references from, Polish cinema in the 80s and Czech film from the 60s aren't going to be as widely well known in this team. So they're not going to understand your full vision. So I think you just have to be really good at describing it and talking particularly about what you're trying to do and getting people on side and pitching your film to a nth degree of what it is and what it isn't. Um, that's still something I'm still trying to figure out, is how exact a pitch I can make it where it completely describes the weird monstrous beast I'm trying to create, and getting people excited about that, because that's where that's where the magic happens, I guess. It's like, yes, you want permission to do your mad crazy movie, but you have to be an effective salesperson in getting people on side with that, to trust you to do that. And that's very hard to do. Um, and you can only do that when you know it yourself, I guess.
Absolutely. In that kind of vein of thought, someone has asked, how do you fund your own films? What's your approach really for applications and for pitching? And yeah, taking that really wild, free form of film that exists in your head, and translating it down into something that's sadly kind of consumable for somebody who maybe doesn't, they work in film for all of the right reasons, but they maybe don't think about it the same way the creators of it do. What's your approach for making it something salesperson-y in that sense, to put
Ugh,
on it? Yeah, I know, cringe.
it's the worst. It's the worst
It
because you're
never
just
gets easy.
to be honest, the real work. I mean, like, I think I'm lucky enough to have figured out what I'm writing enough to know that I enjoy writing. And that's the trick in your brain where, oh, I like writing this. This is so much fun. This is hardly work at all. I get to just go into my little worlds and blah, 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 and write it out. Of course it's hard work. Of course. It's just, it's work that you enjoy because you get so much satisfaction when you crack it and figure it out. So I'm really lucky I've been writing so long, I've kind of found that nice little groove. And people respond to that and it's like, ah, that's it. But the real work is application work and pitching and oof, making lookbooks, visual lookbooks, and whole pile of supporting material, really articulating yourself in a strong writer statement, director statement, not waffling on and being very succinct and clear about what you're trying to do with your work, distilling things down to single sentences. This is the film about blah 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 blah, and that's it, and people can get it. And um, I think that in itself is something I still struggle with because you as a writer want to say everything about what this film is and explain the journey and just vomit on a page all these kind of things that inspired you. But I think the real work is in distilling down your clear vision in what you have, so that when you do application work, it's sort of there secondhand. Like again, I've been really lucky to have worked in development for it was nearly 10 years between different roles. And a lot of the kind of the tough work I would do would be in writing notes for the people, and doing a lot of applications. I cannot count how many applications I did while I worked in development, and big ones and 72-page ones for big funders. And you just get into a language where you're like, this is clear. And again, when you're writing it, like having a tone of um what you're trying to go. If it's a comedy, make your notes funny, and all of that kind of stuff. I think there's a real art into creating the perfect synopsis, the perfect writer's note,
Mhm.
perfect director's intention, and making a lookbook still fills me with some dread because you're just like, oh, it doesn't look good. It looks like a mess of perfect things. Like you want to make sure they're high definition, and you're not a designer, so you're really trying to pull it out of the bag. But that is probably when the most painful work comes in, is like when my producer, Claire or Dee, when they say, oh, we're going to put in for some funding. Can you write a writer's note and and a director's statement and a lookbook? And I do sizzle reels sometimes, so I edit those. You're just like, oh gosh, that's going to be that's just going to dominate everything when you just want to disappear into your work. But you have to get good at that, and um, you have to really develop a language where it's clear what you're trying to say. Give it to trusted friends and see, you know, does this make sense? Do you have questions? And get them to get them to interrogate it, because I think if you can't describe it and people are kind of struggling to find out what you mean from page, it might cost you, you know,
Quite dearly, probably.
yeah, probably that difference of, you know, maybe that's not there in the script yet, but that's maybe what you want to develop in terms of the funding you're going to get. So if you can succinctly say that on the page and people go, oh, that's really interesting. It's not there, but I see what you're trying to get at. They might give you that chance. So I think that's definitely the difference of writing a good note for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, you have to make it work. Unfortunately, like that's your it's so painful when you start out with all these big ideas and um and I think that's the difference of how adaptable and how creative you can be on the spot. Nothing goes to plan when you're filming. You have to surround yourself with the best people to be able to think on the spot and to be able to think creatively. And you really are only as good as the crew around you, and you're really only as good as the producer that you trust. And ideally, you have such a strong trust between the producer that you work with. I've been so lucky with the people I've gotten to work with that, you know, you're not going to be too intimately involved with what pieces of money are changing. And it should be that way where you don't need to know what your crew are making so that if they have an issue with it, for example, you can maintain that positive relationship on set. Your goal is to be creative with your crew. But if your producer comes to you and goes like, that really big sweeping crane shot that you had for the opening, we can't do that. Or, you can have that, or you can have, the tracks on day three. Which one do you want? And I think if um, you as a filmmaker should be able to work within those limitations and creatively think, okay, I'm not going to have that crane, but I can use that on day three. So maybe we'll do something different here, and maybe we'll build tension by, doing this shot instead. And you should be able to communicate that with your HODs and try to figure out something that works in its place. It's never ideal. Of course, you would love everything to work out, but there's always going to be problems and things are going to run behind. And then on the day, you're like, this scene that we wanted to do in 15 shots, we've got an hour. So you've got maybe like 4 or 5 shots tops, maybe three. So you should be able to turn quickly to your HOD. As you probably witnessed when we were working together, that, you know, all of these complicated kind of nuances that you wanted to have in the scene, it's
Yeah.
going to be 3 shots. So what's the best way to cover it now that we've only got an hour left in the whole day? We have to move on after that. You just have to think creatively on the spot and be like, well, it's this, this, and this, and or it might be this. We don't need that and this. Does that work? Okay, let's do that. And you have to rock on, but you have to be prepared to think creatively and know in advance that things are not going to happen, and train your brain to be prepared. If you've got anxiety, you're already thinking about these things. But be prepared for things to go wrong so that you know how you're going to react in that moment, and you know how you're going to keep the show on the road and keep things moving, because it's your responsibility as the director to deliver a film, deliver it in the time that you have, to not go over the time at the end of the day. Um, and yeah, things don't work out and you don't get those pieces of equipment that you want. Things fall apart. Things go 2, 3 hours behind schedule. You still have to make that day, and you really have to think creatively how that's going to work. I mean, like I'm obsessed with everybody's role, and you'll always have ideas about what you want from the start. And I think there's people have been really lucky to work with where they pick up on your general kind of vision for it, and they really respond to it. And I think those initial meetings of like meeting people for coffee, even if you don't have a project yet in mind, I think it's really important to just be aware and to talk to people who are amazing HODs. Talk to them about what their craft is. Talk to them about what they need to get something done, what projects they're excited by. Because I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't really see them. It's sort of like director driven. It's like what do what do the directors want, and then people bend to that. Whereas different projects I've worked on, I've had very different people in mind for different reasons. Where I've worked with a few uh, directors of photography, and there's films I'm developing that are like, oh, he'd be so good for that, or they'd be so good for this one. And because their instincts so well, and the tastes and the things that they want to kind of carve their their talent on would really speak to them and they could really add something to that space. But I think kind of like it's a community of filmmakers, and I think being aware of this incredible wealth of talent that we have out there is really important, and not like waiting till, you got funding and you need to find a production designer like right now. And I think you want to kind of start having those conversations in general and like meeting people at Galway and asking them about what they love to do and the kind of worlds they'd love to make, because that's how you're going to know they're going to be right for a role. And if you get on with them, I think communication, regardless of how talented and wonderful they are, you need to be able to communicate what you want, and you need to have a sense that things are going to move in the right direction. But yeah, um, I think just finding that right kind of um, yeah, I think communication really. I think it's like just go out and meet a pile of HODs and ask them what they love, and then when you are ready to do something, um, someone will jump out in your mind, and maybe they might not be free, but at least it'll sharpen in your brain what you want from people, and it'll determine whether they're right for the role or not.
Yeah, and coming back just to the instinct of trusting your gut and trusting your own
Yeah.
voice, and it being that simple and that difficult all at once, that it is just
To
sometimes
work with someone that's rude either. Like I mean, I know there's so many personalities in this industry.
yeah.
Nobody's going to be able to get on all the time, but you know, I love surrounding myself with people who are generally quite excited to be there. They don't have to be cheerleaders. God, nobody has to be a cheerleader on any set, but you want it. This is why sometimes working with like HODs who are on their way up are really exciting, because they want to put in something really strong that they can get out a lot from it. And if you work with someone who's quite experienced, they might not be bringing their A game because they
Mm,
know it's going to work and it's going to be fine. But I think in that case, I think um yeah, I think there's just it's again, yeah, listening to your gut and kind of determining what what kind of personality do I want to be working behind, and can I communicate all of these things, and is this a equal partnership? Are they getting out the same thing that I want to get out of it as well? Oh, you never have enough time to work with actors. And I like because you might not have enough money to be able to schedule in rehearsal days, so you're sort of thrown into the mix, and you're usually doing something else. Like if I remember correctly, when we were doing Don't Go, the which was during COVID, which was, so I think we really had to be careful about how much exposure we had
wow.
at the time, and not much has changed because we're still a very COVID conscious industry.
Yeah.
We had fittings the same day as a rehearsal. So we would be rehearsing while fittings would be happening elsewhere. And the last thing I shot was exactly the same. So you're constantly being pulled in different directions, and you never have enough time or enough space to just really get into it, because it's not just about whether you feel like, okay, that everyone seems to know where they're going to be. You want to be able to develop a language and a vocabulary that you all trust, and that you sort of found the right language to speak to each other in. Because I still, I feel like I still struggle with rehearsals as a director, because it takes such a while to kind of break down that barrier of I'm there, I'm nervous, I have, I'm there's a big risk in terms of like what I'm hoping is going to happen from these rehearsals that I don't want to enforce on my actors, but I want my actors to loosen up and to be able to feel safe enough to communicate what they want from something. And then I'm constantly thinking of, am I doing enough to make sure that they feel safe, that they're able to open up, or do I need to focus on being more strict and really, really, like, no, do this part, and I feel like there's just never enough time to iron that out. And I love that, because that's where you sort of do the hardest work, and sometimes I think a lot of kind of productions don't realize that that's a really big important part of prep is is that relationship between the director and their actors, is making sure that trust is there and that level of understanding. And it's like priming athletes for a run, and doing that really big warm up so that everybody's singing off the same prayer sheet. And yeah, like I in a dream world, you have months to figure it out. But you never do, and you do have to kind of, you have to put in that work under a lot of pressure and be there for your actors and listen to them and maybe hop on a call later and try to figure something out if something's not working. And yeah, I've worked with small casts and ensemble casts, and it never gets easier. And if anything, you should always put in as much time as possible. Again, hopefully the budget will cover people's time so that that can happen. But always communicate to your actors and never be afraid to say, I don't know what I'm doing right now. What do you guys think? And being vulnerable as a director is definitely a virtue that you don't see that often. Is like, I'm not sure what this should be, and letting other people come in with ideas. Because there's so much pressure on you as a director to be like, you should know everything and everything should be really clear. To a point, I think you should invite people into a space and create a healthy space to let people explore and play. And that's where rehearsals are really good. And you never have enough time to do that. And yeah, you know, it's one amazing paradox about this industry that, you know, I think actors and creatives are really clear about. And I think other people in the industry from like admin or production might not be as sensitive towards. You know, I mean, everybody's different, obviously, but it's a it's an emotional industry. We're, you know, our bread and butter is exploring the minutiae and the vast layers of the human condition. It's going to get messy and it's going to get really uncomfortable.
Mm.
You know, there's going to be disagreements. I think debate is good, not confrontation. Confrontation is inevitable, though. You know, I think people feel very strongly about many things. So you're going to continue to find yourself in situations where you have to emotionally navigate messy circumstances. And then you're going to have people that think, don't get emotional, don't take it personally. I find it very hard not to take it personally. I know it's not the intention, but this is a this is an emotional industry, and you know, we bring all of that baggage and we bring all of our emotional um acumen, I think that's the right word for it, or our experience to set every day, and we bring it to work because that's our superpower. You know, with that, you also have to mold that into a profession where it can be really hard to express what you really mean, and you have to be, obviously you have to be respectful and you have to be considerate, but you have to um you're going to get people who are going to check you on it and maybe, you know, react badly in circumstances. And I think the longer you've been in this industry, you sort of see, you know, there are accepted ways in which people deal with stress, in which other people pick up on, and then they do the same behavior where they, you know, shouting at somebody on set, in a really volatile, humiliating kind of way, or they're yelling on the phone at somebody, or they're just being quite aggressive and going like quick to 100 and just like pouring out their stress on top of somebody who can't shout back. And yet, I don't know if it's just my circumstance, but every time I find something really, really stressful on set, which is always, or not even in development, like you know, going to the bathroom and having a cry is perfectly acceptable behavior, even if we're told it's not. And we're, you know, I think it's sort of the condition we get raised in, is that like expressing your emotion in a professional capacity, crying in the bathroom, is sort of considered, ah, it's very weak and I don't know
God.
if she can handle the stress. Whereas like shouting at somebody on set is sort of seen as, you
Yeah.
know, acceptable because you're in control or whatever. But that to me just seems like you're not really in control of your emotions, whereas it's far more healthy to go to a safe environment, let out that stress in whatever way that you can. If it's like if you need a cheeky cigarette or you need to just have a little cry, clean yourself up and come back to work, that's such a healthy thing to do. And I wish someone had told me that before. But you're always going to find people who are going to interpret that differently because it's a very tough industry and it's easy to, you know, it's easy to people are going to interpret your emotional responses to things that are beyond your control. And you know what, fuck it. Like um if people are going to be dicks about it, then maybe they're not people you want to work with. But sets seem to be moving in a positive space where things are a lot more, we're heightenedly aware of bad behavior, and we create safe places, we create fun environments where people feel safe to create, because at the end of the day, that affects the quality of the work that we make. If you're, I see it as my responsibility as a director, um, as much as I can in the stressful environment that we have, to make sure everybody feels safe to express what they want and that they generally would like them to have fun when they're doing it, because we don't do this job um, to make money. I mean, hopefully we will someday, but you know, I think we do it because we love what we do. And they should be safe places where if you're not having the best time, you know, there's no reason you should feel bad for feeling vulnerable in a moment. Like I absolutely have cried on every set, like snuck off to just have a small little like, oh,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then cleaned up, come back, and we're like, right, okay, what's next? You know, that's what you need to do. You need to do, and yeah, I feel like I would love just to have much more of a richness of accepting all of those kind of vulnerabilities, because we're only human at the end of the day, and we're making incredible things under inhuman pressure,
Yeah.
and that has to go somewhere.